Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace be upon you all. Welcome. Thank you for bringing your heart, and I invite you today to really honor this most sacred tool within you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you by being as present as you can. You know, a lot of times when we come into spaces like this, we don't really take the time to assess which part of me is leading when we come into a space, right? You know, you're maybe just on cruise control, your mind is just, you know, going through the motions. So you're like, there's a class, I'm gonna go, right? Or, you know, maybe you came here with your nafs as the lead, maybe you came here for the food, you know, who knows, right? But when we pause and we say, what is my intention for coming here? And we actually direct that intention to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have the opportunity to do that at any moment, by the way. If you haven't done it, do it now. But what that does is that it is you prioritizing this most sacred tool within you, which is the heart, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us to worship Him, to seek Him, to love Him, to contain all the treasures that we can experience on our path back to Him, right? So don't take those little things, those little practices for granted. They are amazing in shifting our heart, and it allows you to take more from what you're experiencing. So when you take a moment and you renew your intention right now, and I want to give you a moment to do that, what you're doing is you're saying, Ya Allah, you know, I might have came in with one intention, but now I want to elevate it. I want to elevate it by directing it towards you. And like I said, we all have the opportunity to elevate our intentions at any moment. So take a moment to honor this most sacred part within you, direct your intention to Allah, and then be present as much as you can throughout the session. You cannot walk away with anything if your heart is not present. And the way that we become present is every time we find our mind going to, you know, to the future, what you're going to do after, thinking about a moment that passed, you bring it back. You say, the present is the most sacred space, and it's the most important space, and it's the only space where I can grow. It's the only space where I can connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's the only space where I can be nourished and connected to myself. So take a moment to renew your intentions. This topic today is really important, the topic of transforming our God image and our self-image, which essentially means our perception of Allah, how we view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how we view ourselves. And the reason why this topic is so important is because those two areas, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your relationship with yourself, are actually the two most important areas in your life that many people don't realize. We often focus on our relationship with Allah, but we neglect our relationship with ourselves. But actually, those are the two relationships you interact with every day. They are the constant. They are the two relationships you can control, the only two relationships you actually have the power to control. Right? You can't control other people. You can't control how other people perceive you. You can't control so many things outside of you. But what you can control and what you do have power over is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your relationship with yourself, and the image. Not obviously, when I say image, I don't mean a physical image of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean your perception. How do you view Allah? How do you think of Allah? But also, how do you think of yourself? So I want to focus on those two areas. Our relationship, you know, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with ourselves. When you focus on those two areas and when you put in your energy to really transform those two areas, a few things happen. You start depending less on what is external to make you happy. So many people, and I see this all the time in my work, right? That people fixate on that which is outside of them. And they will say things like, if only this person changes, then I'll be happy. If only Allah gives me this, I'll be happy. If, you know, this person does this or this person does that. Or they're fixated, or they're measuring their life and the value of everything they do by the perception of others on them. Their perceptions of others of them, basically. I wonder what that person thinks. I wonder how they perceive this action. I wonder, you know, how that landed. And it just fixation, overthinking. And this is happening in our world today because the society we live in is programming us to constantly go outward. and measure everything we do by the reaction. And I think we've come to a point where I think so many people think that the value of what they do is good if people reacted well, and the value of what they do is bad if somebody got upset with them. There's all this like things that you don't really see in the seerah. When you study the seerah, you don't really see this. We live in an oversensitive time, right? People are overly sensitive. People are so afraid of displeasing others. And again, partly it's due to the society we live in and this cancel culture that we live in, right? Where you make one mistake, you're going to be labeled as this person. But also it's partly due to your own psychological makeup. You know, maybe you were taught that the only way to survive and the only way to get through life is by making sure nobody's upset with you. But there's a cost to pay when you live like that, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not ask you to live like that. But the power of doing this work is you start taking your power back. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this power, right? This power to focus on our life, this potential, this energy, to really spend it the right way. And when you spend it in fruitless directions, or you spend it in places that you can't really control, because ultimately you cannot control people's minds, you cannot control people's hearts, you cannot control people's perception of you. Every single person in your life actually has a different perception of you. Have you ever thought of that? That you have this idea of who you are, and you think that's the idea, that I'm making sure everybody has this idea of me. But the reality is you're getting into a realm you can't control. And everybody still will have their own perception of you, because it has to do with their own lens of their heart. It has to do with their own makeup. And that's none of your business. It's something you can't control, right? And I think that's so important. I know we might know it up here, but it's so important to be reminded of, because we spend so much energy trying to, when we make a choice, spend so much energy making sure, oh, is everyone going to be happy with this? And, you know, constantly overthinking about how to make sure that people's perception of me is intact. So where is the perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the perception of ourselves formed? And by the way, if you have any questions, I'm going to leave time at the end and I'll take questions, inshallah. So our perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our perception of ourselves is formed through our upbringing, how you grew up, the messages that you received about yourself, especially, you know, in your early childhood years, in childhood especially, because your brain is more like a sponge and it absorbs these messages. So parents, and how parents raised you, how parents spoke to you, how parents, you know, basically shaped your own perception of yourself, but also influences. And peers, you know, there's a period where peers become the most important in a child's life as well. But also how we interpreted our tests. So we go through life and we go through experiences, and we don't monitor how we interpret the things that we go through. What I mean is that we go through something and we allow ourselves to come to a conclusion about what we're going through without assessing if that conclusion is truthful, or if that conclusion is pleasing to Allah, or is it aligned, and if it's aligned with the Quran and Sunnah, right? If it's aligned with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us. So many of us actually go years and years, if you're not used to doing this work, you go years and years without assessing the conclusions you make about yourself and the conclusions you make about Allah, and then all the other conclusions, all the conclusions you make about others, the conclusions you make about the world, about people, right? But today we're focusing in on our perception of Allah and ourselves, because that's the most important one. And actually, if you can purify these two perceptions and these two relationships, your lens of everything else also becomes purified as well. So your perception of others become purified, because we don't realize we project a lot, you know? And this is why they say it's a superpower to not take things personally and realize that people, when they say things to you that are hurtful, they're projecting a lot of their own stuff. And we do that too, by the way. We project onto Allah what we feel towards ourselves, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But we also project onto others how we feel Allah is with us, or how we feel towards ourselves. So when you rectify this inner world, your perception, not just your mindset, but your heart set changes. So we often in Western psychology, we talk about mindset a lot, right? And this is why in my method, I talk about the concept of heart set, because we don't often think about how important it is to set the heart in the right direction, to have a good view, to have an accurate approach to things in life. So how we interpret our test becomes really powerful. And what conclusions have you made about your tests in life, your struggles? What conclusions have you made about what you went through? And that's a big part of my work, especially my clinical work. When you work with someone, for example, who's been through trauma, a big part of that is really correcting and rectifying how they interpreted what happened to them. And actually, our interpretations about how Allah is with us and about our view of ourselves, believe it or not, that's what exacerbates most pain and worsens most pain. So there's the pain of the original struggle. You go through a test or a trauma or an experience. That's painful, okay? That's human. It's painful. You're allowed to feel pain. But then if your perception of Allah and your perception of yourself is not rectified, guess what you did? You've added a whole lot more pain. And people don't realize that they do this. And oftentimes this is the reason why sometimes people say, Allah tells me in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, but I feel that Allah does not burden a soul more than it can bear. But why do I feel like this is more than I can bear? And oftentimes when people say that to me, I say, what are you carrying that Allah did not ask you to carry? And oftentimes what they are carrying is really, really flawed interpretations of their test, really inaccurate and flawed perceptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and flawed perceptions of themselves. So it's not just the test now they're going through, now they're carrying all this negative emotional experience of who they think they are and how they think Allah is with them. And I want you to think about this. In my work, when I work with someone who's been affected, by a really difficult relationship with their parent. Let's say they grew up with a parent who was very abusive, never showed them love, right? Didn't have a lot of rahmah. You know how much a child struggles even throughout adulthood, especially if they're not healing. And even if they're healing, a part of it stays with you to some level. You're always working against correcting that verbal abuse or whatever it is that your parent made you feel. A person will struggle so much because they never believed that their parent loved them. Or they struggle so much because they never felt loved by their parent. They never got good words from their parents, right? Now, this is what happens to a person when they don't feel loved by their parent. You know what many of us don't think about? What happens to a person when they walk this earth, this journey, never understanding or experiencing or really feeling and believing that Allah loves them? And this is not just the parent, this is the creator of their parents. So many people have a relationship with the deen based in halal haram, obligation. And not that, no, everything that Allah made halal and everything that Allah made haram and everything that Allah gave me and everything that Allah withheld and what He has willed and what He has prohibited is all rooted in His immense love for me. And to not just know it up here. In my heart over mind and ego method, the H.O.M.E method that Farah was mentioning, I talk about the majority of it is about really leading from the heart and not just the mind, right? And learning how that just because you know something up here doesn't mean that it's a truth within you here. And so some of these things I might be saying, you're like, yeah, that sounds accurate, but it's not lived. It's not yet an experience in the heart. That is, you actually have to act. You actually have to act upon these truths in order for it to live. You actually have to walk this earth with certainty and yaqeen and looking for Allah's love everywhere you go and actively reflecting on Allah's love for you. So some of the harmful God images or perceptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that people have that are rooted in some of these things I mentioned is one of the most common ones I see is that Allah is out to punish me when I'm tested, right? That, they look at Allah, their view of Allah is if I'm going through struggle, that means that He's the punisher with me. And believe it or not, because again, and this depends on everyone's psychology, right? Like for one person, let's say they grew up with a parent who had an authoritarian parenting style. So in psychology, we know there's different parenting styles, and one of the most harmful ones is authoritarian, which is like almost like a tyrant parenting style. It has very high discipline, very low compassion and affection, right? And this is actually one of the harmful ones. They say that kids who grow up with this, with very low rahmah, very low mercy, very low affection from their parents, and very high discipline, they actually end up having a lot of anxiety. They become aggressive later on. So there's a correlation between that parenting style and issues that these kids develop later on in adulthood. But you know what's another parenting style? Permissiveness. A permissive parenting style where the parent is like always giving affection, but no structure. This is actually not one of the good ones either. The best one is authoritative, where high structure, balance, and high affection and love as well, and mercy and compassion. So the child feels a balance of both, subhanAllah. So anything, it's so interesting. So, and this is how Allah is, right? Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, right? But He also has attributes that remind us that, you know, how He can be with us when we do wrong, right? But His rahmah is so high, His mercy is so high, and it outweighs everything else, right? But we need that balance. So when I work with someone who, let's say, who grew up with a parenting style of someone who was a parent who was always harsh with them, didn't really show affection, they tend to view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as harsh, as the punisher. They actually have a very hard time understanding that Allah is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim with them. And when I work with, and their relationship with Allah is driven a lot by very high fear, because that's what they grew up with. Like you thrive when you fear the consequence, basically, right? But the other style, where someone who grows up with a parent who just gave without bounds, no structure, which is also harmful, by the way. As I mentioned, you know, this is also not good. And no structure at all, and very high affection, but no discipline, no structure. This person I found tends to grow up not really understanding boundaries with Allah, and really just imbalanced view of Allah's hope. So they take Allah's hope for granted. They take Allah's mercy for granted. You know, they don't want to talk about consequences. They think that Allah's, you know, they just don't want to even acknowledge the other aspect and the truths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught them, right? And this is harmful because you take Allah for granted. We're not supposed to take Allah's mercy for granted. Not supposed to take Allah's, you know, even His compassion towards us for granted. So that's a harmful God image. Allah's out to punish me when I'm tested. The other one is Allah's not accepting of my dua. That's another harmful perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is, you know, not accepting of my dua. So when I make dua, you don't really have that yaqeen. You don't really believe that you're deserving, which is another problem too, because this is another product of our programming in our society, which is we think we have to deserve everything, right? I'm gonna talk about this in a second. So Allah, another harmful God perception is Allah will love me only when I'm perfect. So yes, we know that we want to seek Allah's love, but there's a flawed belief here. We think that there are people who have Allah's love, and then there are people who are not loved by Allah. This is actually really wrong to believe, because there's a basic love that Allah has for all His creation. And for us to believe that you have to somehow you're born in this world without Allah's love is really harsh. And I find people, you know, I remember one sister telling me, you know, Allah's love is so conditional, right? Like meaning that there's conditions for her to be loved by Allah. So I asked her, I said, you know, well, what condition did you have to fulfill to be born? What condition did you have to fulfill to have eyes that see, ears that hear? What condition did you have to fulfill for Allah to make you known? I mean, think about this. You know, before you were created, you were something unknown. Like you could have been something that nobody knew. You could have been something that nobody loved. You could have been something that had no value in this world and ability to contribute in some capacity. Nobody would have ever known your name. So why would Allah create us and make us seen and known if it's not out of love? So we have these wrong, this is also a harmful God image, that there's no love for me from Allah unless like I'm perfect, or unless like I earn it to some degree. Allah has a basic, like a foundational love for all of his creation. But yes, we want to be, see, I think that the way that I differentiate it in my work is that there's the love that he has towards his creation, and then there's a love that he has towards his servants, right? Towards those who worship him. And that's the love we want to earn. We want to be amongst the servants whom Allah has great love for. We want to be amongst those. This is why we say, we ask, we make that dua, right? Oh Allah, I ask for your love, and the love of those whom you love, and the love of the actions that bring me closer to your love. So, but as I'm saying them, this is just to give you examples of how these things come up and creep up within us, and we leave them unmonitored, and we shouldn't leave them unmonitored. And by the way, this specific God perception for the people who, this is to all the perfectionists out here, right? And I'm not talking about ihsan here. I'm not talking about excelling in your ibadah. We want to worship Allah with ihsan. We want to worship Allah with excellence. I'm talking to the people who have a very rigid idea of who they are and who they should be in life. That it's like, and if anything happens outside of this idea, a lot of shame comes up. That's how you know it's not excellence, it's perfectionism. And perfectionism is not something that's healthy, by the way. It actually cuts you off from Allah's love in so many ways, and it harbors a lot of shame. It only increases shame to come up within you. And shaitan uses shame. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt is, this action is wrong and it's bad and I should not continue this action. Shame is, I am flawed, I am bad, there's something wrong with me. And people who are perfectionists, like, they have this perfect view of how their life should be. They have this perfect idea of how they should look like. They have this perfect idea of what everything should be. So when anything falls outside of that, shame comes up. I'm not good enough. And they throw in the towel oftentimes. So they sabotage themselves and all of that. So here, this negative God perception speaks to the ones who struggle with perfectionism. That's a rule you made for you, but Allah did not make that rule for you. Allah did not say that he only loves those who are perfect, right? Another one is God has abandoned me, and that's something that's also common. And if it wasn't something that was common in the human experience, people who are sensitive to abandonment, we would not have the surah al-Duha. Ma wada'aka rabbuka wa ma qala, right? Your Lord has not abandoned you, nor does he hate you. So a lot of people who felt abandoned in life, whether physically or emotionally, like they were not seen, they were not heard, or their needs were not met, they often can project onto Allah this. So whenever they go through pain or difficulty, Allah has abandoned me. Because maybe that's what other people did. So remember what I said in the beginning, we each have our own psychological makeup, and we can easily project onto Allah what we feel towards ourselves. You feel like you're somebody that went through a lot of abandonment. You felt like people are not there for you. You feel like when you need someone, they're not there. You might, not being aware, you might project that onto Allah and think that's how Allah is with you. And I hear this. Recently a sister told me, when I make dua and I don't feel it, I just know that Allah's like not listening to me. So when we process that, that's how she feels sometimes when she's, speaking to people, or people in her life who made her feel not seen, not heard. So she's projecting her experiences with people onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So Allah, of course, he does not function based on our feelings. And this is where we have to rectify these flawed beliefs that many people have. That just because you don't feel it, you think Allah's far from you. So what are we saying in that moment? We're actually saying something much deeper. And so wrong. We're saying that Allah functions according to my thoughts, to my emotions. So if I feel it, he's close. If I don't feel it, he's far. And so your measure for defining who Allah is your own nafs and your own emotions and your own feelings. Like think about, when you break these things down, you're like, oh my gosh, what am I saying? Allah is above that, right? Allah does not function. Allah will always be as-Sami'ul Basir, whether you feel it or not. And He will always be close to you, whether you feel it or not. And that's something to root ourselves in, that let me just take a step back. And we all have these days, right, where we feel so weighed down. We feel like it's so, our perception of ourselves and our perception of our life can be bleak, right? And we let that guide our perception of everything else. So we need to be, when you do this work, you it's not that you don't have moments like that, it's that you are quicker to redirect yourself. And to say, no, wait, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Allah is here. Allah is listening to me. Whether I feel it or not, Allah has good in store for me. Allah loves me. You just try to correct yourself faster. So these are just some examples of harmful God image, beliefs or God perceptions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I feel like I have a braid coming down. Harmful self-image is, I'm not someone that is lovable. Again, this could be rooted in upbringing. This could be rooted in past experiences, even adult relationships. People who've been in harmful relationships and learned to internalize these beliefs about themselves. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving of anything good. So these are very defeating. Or even the one I mentioned, I'm flawed, like something is wrong with me. 1 second. So we all have these pieces that we've carried within ourselves over the years, through messages we received, again, through experiences we've been through how we ourselves have interpreted our own experiences in life, right? But then Allah puts us through a test. And this is where we really understand that Allah tests those whom He loves, if we look at it this way, right? So throughout our lives, we carry these false pieces, right, about ourselves. And false pieces that have these interpretations that are wrong and flawed about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about ourselves, about others. And a lot of people don't take the time to assess them. They're just on cruise control, And they almost accept them, in a lot of people do this where that's just who I am. And they kind of just go with the flow and they don't really assess where that comes from. Because I always say this work is not for the weak. It really does take courage. And I say this because if anyone, wants to go to therapy or wants to do the work on themselves or see somebody to help them with any of these difficult pieces that they carry, don't ever think that it means that you're weak, because this work is not for the weak. Facing your nafs is not for the weak. Facing your emotions is not for the weak. Facing these false pieces about yourself, okay, where did I get this interpretation? Where did I learn that from? And how can I fix it? That's not for the weak. Only the courageous do that work, by the way. So we carry these pieces of ourselves and then we go through something difficult. And Allah puts us through a very difficult test. You know what happens when you go through a test? You have no choice. I mean, there's no, you go into a situation where whatever is false cannot be sustained. And just take this as a rule. You know how this year, after everything is happening in Palestine, you know how all this truth is coming out? And what's false cannot be sustained anymore? The false narratives, the false perceptions of, what's happening in Gaza, it can't be sustained. You see this truth overpowering all the falsehood in such an incredible way. So many people coming to Islam. This can only happen when there's a test, by the way. Your pieces, your false pieces, do not reveal themselves when things are easy. It's like the example that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in the Quran about the people on the boat who, when it's going smoothly, they don't worship Allah. But when the boat becomes rocky, they worship Allah and they acknowledge that there's a Lord. Why? You cannot hold on to falsehood during calamities and during tests. You cannot hold on to falsehood during calamities and during tests. It won't sustain you. It won't sustain you. You can only hold on to truth. Whatever is truthful is the only thing that you can hold on to. It's like hold on to the rope of Allah. Anything else that was false, you can't sustain you. Like, let's say like you claim to have all these beliefs about yourself, right? Like all these things like, oh, I'm a patient person, I'm this, you have all these pieces. Guess what? When you go through a test, only what is true is what can help you, right? It doesn't matter what you claimed, right? So that's the power of like calamities. That's the power of tests. And that's why Allah only tests those whom He loves. So this is a fundamental truth to be connected to. So when we understand this, we ask different questions now. We don't say, why me? We say, what is Allah revealing to me? What is Allah teaching me? What does Allah have in store for me? What does Allah want to give me? And this is hard. It's hard, right? When we go through tests and it's difficult. And that's why if Allah is withholding something from you, is Allah testing you for something for a long time, or a calamity hits, or anything hard, and you feel like you're looking around and you're thinking, why me? Know that Allah only tests those whom He wants to give something great to. Internally, especially internally. Because the greatest gifts are internal. So this is why, because when you are tested, it's the only time that a process is created where you can hold on to truth, and you can gain more truths, and you can let go of what is false, and you can assess these pieces about yourself. You know, these beliefs that we have about ourselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't reveal themselves when things are easy. We feel good, we think everything's fine. They reveal themselves in difficult situations. When you have conflict with a loved one, that's when your beliefs about yourself become really triggered. Because then you realize, why did I react that way? Oh, it's because, and you actually reflect on it, oh, it's because I felt this way about myself. Or I felt this way about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or if, you really assess what is true. When you go through something, anything challenging in life, there's a message in it for you that Allah's teaching you. And this is why, if we truly understand that everything is rooted in Allah's love, you become curious and your heart becomes open and you become like an explorer, rather than somebody who's closed their heart, thinking that this is just a test, Allah's out to punish me, it has nothing to offer me. So you don't gain from it. In Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in Surah Taha, He tells Musa of all, He reminds him of His favors upon him. When his mother was told to put him in the river, and then when He put him in Pharaoh's house. But after Allah recounts with Musa alayhi salam all the things that he went through, do you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Musa? He tells him, وَأَلْقَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ مَحَبَّةً مِّنِّي وَلِتُصْنَعَ عَلَى عَيْنِي. And I have bestowed upon you love from me, so that you may be raised under my eye. So He tells him about all these difficult things that Musa's been through. But then He tells him, basically what He's saying is, all of this is rooted in my love for you. Why? Because I was molding you. I was shaping you, I was molding you, I was raising you. And that's essentially what tests are designed to do. If Allah doesn't see potential in you, He doesn't test you. He doesn't withhold anything. He gives everything to you. And we see this, and we know this from our tradition, that those who continuously disobey Allah, Allah gives them the dunya. Khalas, enjoy it. So you see how now your framework, when you see Allah's love, you ask different questions? Instead of why me, is Allah punishing me, what's happening? You say, what is Allah teaching me? What does He have to give me? What is in store for me? So now your perception of Allah is like, someone who loves you so much that you can only be going through this because He has something great to offer you. Internally and externally, but also in this dunya and the next. So this is the power of tests. You have no choice but to assess your false pieces. And this is what is really beautiful that I see happen when I work with people who've been through difficult things, is that when they come and they do this inner work, they can lay out these pieces and pick each one and say, well, this one doesn't belong to me anymore. And this one is actually not true. Why did I carry this? Oh, I learned this from my childhood. I learned this from my parent. A lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people carry these very difficult beliefs about themselves from, either childhood abuse or previous abuse situations where it's internalized. And especially if you went through it in childhood, and I'm speaking to anyone here who's been verbally abused, especially in childhood, or been through difficult experiences, be compassionate with yourself, because it's not something easy to break. You know, and Allah knows this, by the way. Allah knows if you've internalized these really negative and difficult messages about yourself. And Allah knows how hard, because parents are supposed to be the bridge between you and Allah. Parents, they have a sacred responsibility, and they're supposed to be the bridge between you and Allah. And so when they use that responsibility to harm your view of yourself, that's not light in front of Allah. And as I mentioned, adults who are even healing, they carry this into their adulthood. It gets easier to manage, but it's something that they have to work on constantly. And so what do you do if you're in those situations? You have to ihtasibuha and Allah, like you have to account for it with Allah. Every time you feel something negative about yourself because it was rooted in trauma or childhood or things that it's hard to break, account for it with Allah, but do the work of trying to replace it with something more positive. And the way that it helps is that you start to have more experiences as you do this work. You start to have more experiences where you start to see yourself through Allah and not through the person who abused you. And it does work. And you just start to have more experiences like that, where you start to see yourself through Allah and not through the difficult things that you went through in life or the difficult people that told you who you were. You start to have, and that's really our goal for anyone, regardless of our experiences, is we want our perception of ourselves to be rooted in truth and in how Allah views us, right? And not even through our own lens. And that's why I really love this quote. I don't know the author, but it always stayed with me. It said, heal so you don't filter everything through your wounds. Heal so you don't filter everything through your wounds. So we all have wounds, right? But many people don't address their wounds, but they're filtering everything through these wounds, through their, let's say you even went through like a difficult friendship. You've made interpretations, so now you carry that wound. You don't assess it, you don't align it with Allah, you don't assess those conclusions you made. So guess what? Now your future friendships, you assess it through that wound. So whatever wound you have, if you don't address it and you don't take it to Allah and you don't align it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't correct the interpretations that you've made, you're going to filter everything through that wound. And that becomes harmful to you, right? So I hope you're seeing the power of interpretation and the power of the conclusions that we make about the experiences we go through. So how do we approach this? Obviously, this is not something that's like an easy fix in one talk, right? But there's a few things that we have to start out with. Number one, rooting ourselves in the Quran, right? The Quran has to be our anchor. Why? Because when we want to remove falsehood, we have to root ourselves in truth. And how can we align ourselves with truth if we're disconnected from the one who has named himself the truth, al-haq, right? So this is the way we want to approach anything we want to gain in life: healing, empowerment, a healthier relationship with ourselves and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that I want to root myself in the one who has named himself al-haq, the one who has spoken the truth and sent down the message with the truth and takes us out from darkness to light. Because truth symbolizes light, right? This is something known. People equate truth with light, right? Or truth will light the way, we say. And Allah tells us, يُخْرِجْهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, right? He takes them out of darkness into light. You can equate darkness with falsehood, and you can equate light with truth. And that's what happens when you start getting rid of these false pieces and these false perceptions. You start to experience more light in your life. You start to feel lighter. And you start to walk your path a little bit lighter. Remember in the beginning I said that a lot of times we carry more than Allah asks us to carry. So these pieces you're letting go of and you're saying, why have I been carrying this? This is not true. This is not rooted in what Allah said. The powerful thing about going to the Quran and training yourself to go to the Quran, especially when you're weighed down by life, is you let Allah speak for himself. And that's really important. So a lot of times what happens is we start speaking for Allah rather than going to the Quran and letting Allah speak for himself. So even in Surah Al-Duha, as we mentioned, you feel like you're abandoned, go to Surah Al-Duha. Let that be your anchor those times when you feel abandoned, when you feel alone. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. And read it as if Allah is speaking directly to your heart. Again, don't just have a mental experience. Have a heart experience where you feel like Allah is speaking to you and you believe it and you live it. It's not just for the people who came before us. This ayah is not just for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No, it's for me. you see me, you hear me, you are with me. So having a direct relationship with the Quran starts to override a lot of these negative beliefs that we have about Allah, or false beliefs that we have about Allah and about ourselves. Because sometimes it might not be negative, but it's false. You know, like sometimes you might think something about Allah, you know, and it's not accurate. It's just not accurate. It's not like you're saying anything bad, but it's just not accurate. It's not who Allah is. Like like someone saying that I feel far from Allah, it means that Allah's far from me. She's not saying anything bad about Allah, but indirectly she's saying Allah's functioning based on her feelings, right? Sometimes we're not intentionally saying anything bad about Allah, but we're saying something that is not true. So believe what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said about himself. And this is where the names of Allah come in. You know, where literally you can take any struggle that you have and you could find a name of Allah that speaks to that struggle. And if we train ourselves to do this, it becomes a force in our life. And I think this is what's so powerful about Islam, and I see this in my own life, but also in my work with others, is that Islam, it gives us this ability to gain from Allah what we did not get from the world, what we did not get from the people. So like in Western psychology, sometimes the narrative around trauma is sometimes so negative at times, because it's like, it almost looks at it as like, oh, this person's been abused, this person's been through trauma, there's just this broken thing for them, right? But if we look at the prophets, alayhim salam, and we don't have that view, right? Why? Because they had a direct relationship with Allah. So if I could actually break down the struggles of all the prophets, they had trauma, right? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had a lot of it, abandoned by one caregiver after another, you know, and hurt by his own people, immense loss, immense grief, and then the loss of his children. That's trauma, we would call it, right? But that's the power of Islam, is that we each have our own psychological background. We each have our own experiences. We each have our own losses, what we didn't get, let's say from childhood, or let's say from our experiences, or let's say even currently in our life, things that are missing in our life. But you always have the opportunity to access what Allah has in store for you and to account for your loss with Him. So Ya Allah, you see what I don't have, you see how important it is, or you see what I didn't get, or you see what I'm going through, and you go to Him to give you what the people can't give you. And that's a power, by the way. That's so powerful, because it teaches you that your wholeness, at the end of the day, the only one who can complete you is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody can complete you except Allah. Nobody is a half of you, by the way. Even with marriage, people say, oh, that person's my other half, but that doesn't make sense, because would Allah depend your wholeness on something He could take away? The Prophet ﷺ says marriage is half your deen. That's how important marriage is, because it allows you to walk towards Allah, right? It allows you, it's supposed to be a security for you. But let's say Allah tests someone with taking their spouse, or let's say Allah tests someone taking their children. Does that person not have the capacity to be whole, to be worthy, to walk in society, to be worthy? And we have these examples in our tradition. In the Quran, when Allah talks about the successful ones who come back to Him, what does He say? He says, no, not wealth nor children will benefit a person except one who comes back to Allah with qalbin salim. What is salim? We always say sound. We always translate a sound, but it's not just sound. Salim is something that is complete. Salim is something that is whole. You have learned to seek your wholeness through Allah. Whatever is missing, you go to Allah. Whatever you don't have, you go to Allah. You've learned to see your worth and your value through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So catching ourselves when we go through difficulty, what am I thinking about Allah? And make sure that you're not adding more to the test than intended. And train yourself to seek Allah's love, to look for Allah's love. You know, Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, rahimahullah, she used to say, I look for Allah's love everywhere, and suddenly I am filled with it. So she was actively looking for Allah's love. What does that mean? Something happened to me. Where is Allah's love? How is Allah showing me His love through this? And it's hard, and it's okay if sometimes, and that doesn't mean you don't feel pain, by the way. And I think this is the black and white approach that people have sometimes towards like difficulty, is they think that if you're looking for Allah's love and you feel Allah's love, that you're not feeling pain. Yaqub alayhi salam 100% felt Allah's love. But why did he cry then till he went blind? Because he's human and he felt grief. But what did he say when people said, you're going to ruin yourself, basically, from all this crying, from all this grief? What did he say? Ashku bathi wa huzni ila Allah. But he also, I complain of my grief and my sorrow to Allah. But he also said, I know from Allah what you do not know. So he had yaqeen and certainty that Allah loves him, that Allah is doing something for him and not against him. But it didn't take away from the pain and the grief and the sorrow of losing Yusuf alayhi salam. So we have to stop having this black and white view. You can be faithful and have iman, and it could sit right next to your pain. The difference is you're letting your pain be the means to Allah and not something that's taking you far away from Allah. That's how you know. But faith, iman, is not the absence of pain. In fact, faith and iman can only be nurtured oftentimes, it's nurtured the most through difficult tests. And those are the moments you realize how much Allah can suffice you regardless of your external circumstances. So looking for Allah's love, training your heart to look for Allah's love, to ask different questions. What is Allah doing for me? Not against me. What is Allah doing for me? You know, that's why training yourself, even when you hurt yourself or you fall, to immediately, even when you're in pain, say Alhamdulillah. Why do we do that? Because you're indirectly saying that there's something in it for me. And not just in this dunya, in the akhirah, right? Because we know per the hadith that no sorrow, no fatigue, not even a prick of a thorn touches a person, except that it's an expiation of their sins. So when the akhirah is a big component here, if you only see this world, you're never going to see Allah's love. You can't, because this has become your permanent reality. But when the akhirah is your biggest concern, it's easier to see Allah's love, because you're not just asking, what is He doing for me in this world? You're asking, what is He doing for me in the next world, right? Self-reflection is important. Being able to build that muscle of facing your own ego and facing your own nafs, and being corrected and saying, and correcting yourself and saying, oh, that reaction right there, that was very nafs-centered, or where did that come from? Especially when you're triggered. Those are the moments that really tells you a lot about your beliefs and what you need, and maybe something that you're disconnected from. But self-reflection is part of our faith, and this is something that we often miss. I mean, if you're going a day without reflection, you're robbing yourself. If you're going a day without turning inward and actually assessing your heart and what you're experiencing, is you're doing a disservice to yourself. Because if you look at the Quran, how many verses end with for those who reflect, for those who reflect, for those who reflect? Why? So Allah could mention these signs, but He says for those who reflect, meaning you can't receive signs, you can't receive meaning unless you're actually active in reflection. So in my method, I talk about how reflection is the bridge between knowing something up here and experiencing it here. So you might know something, you might read a verse, right? But you sit with it and you reflect on it and how it applies to your life. Like, for example, this concept of, you could take one of the concept that I mentioned today, right? And sit with it later. Right now, you might understand up here, and it's like, oh, that makes sense, right? But for you to actually live it, like this concept of looking for Allah's love, if you sit with it later and you reflect on all the ways that Allah was loving to you today, you're going to start to feel something in your heart. You're going to start to taste the sweetness of something that was just something you learned up here a few hours ago, right? Now it becomes something that is internalized. You taste the sweetness of it. It became something that you are actually having a direct relationship with. And that's what self-reflection does. You bridge that gap between I learned something and I'm looking at it objectively, and I learned something and I feel how it applies to me. That's the difference. So we need self-reflection, always reflecting on, what is driving this action, especially if you have a pattern of behavior to do something and it keeps coming up, you have a reaction that you keep having. Though the things that become cyclical, or the things that become like you do often, those are the things you need to assess. Like, what is driving this? What is the belief that's driving this? So self-reflection, monitoring our thoughts, and actively doing two things: intercepting them, but also replacing them with something that is true. So again, this is not going to come unless you actually do the work of like assessing yourself and reflecting, right? Of, you know, let's say, and I'll give you a good example of how you can do this. Let's say you're having a normal day and everything is fine, and then all of a sudden you feel constricted, or you feel very heavy, you feel weighed down, you feel bad about yourself, or like you start to engage in these like, just you don't feel good about yourself. Pause and ask yourself, what thought led to this? Because we think that, you know, something must have happened to make me feel this way. But in psychology, we say your thoughts about what happened led you to feel this way. Okay, so two people could go through the same experience. One feels down and one feels normal, like fine. So what's the difference then? Is that the way this person interpreted it and their thoughts about it led to this experience, this emotional experience. So emotions are often not the direct reaction. They're often the secondary to our thoughts. So practice this like on the days, especially like you feel like a shift, you get in your car, you feel like, you know, let's say you have an interaction with someone, and then after that interaction, you feel so weighed down. Ask yourself, what was I thinking about this interaction? What interpretation did I make? You know, and by the way, that's not to say that, you know, everything that happens is because you had to have a thought. You know, obviously if somebody comes and like calls you a name, you're allowed to be hurt. We're not going to be robots, right? But it just having that introspection that like, I also play a role in what I internalize. And by the way, the things that trigger us the most are things that we believe about ourselves. Okay, so like if you love something about yourself, let's say you love you love your scarf, right? Your purple. You have no problems with wearing your purple scarf, right? And someone comes up to you, a stranger comes up to you, or anyone says, you know, I don't really like your scarf. It most likely is not going to faze you or ruin your entire day. You're just going to be like, okay, you know. But let's say there was an aspect within yourself that you already didn't like, or you already had a hard time accepting about yourself, and you actually work really hard to make sure that people don't have that perception of you. Because that's what happens, by the way, when we don't accept parts of ourselves. We work really hard to make sure that that's not the image we portray, right? And acceptance doesn't mean you don't want to change it. When you accept something about yourself, you're just acknowledging this is a reality. I accept that it's something I need to work on. But many people don't even want to look like, no. I want to just like try to create an image that doesn't match that. So if someone comes and acknowledges something that you have a hard time accepting about yourself, you're probably going to be affected, right? So again, it's not to say that we're not allowed to be affected by what people say and do, but when you find that you get really triggered or your reactions become really defensive and big, it usually means that they've triggered something you already believe about yourself. Or you're working hard to not be, and you're assuming that that's what they think of you. You know, so it's deep work, right? It's not always easy, but it's worth it, and it's so rewarding because you just realize how much power Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us within, and how much sometimes we struggle because we give power outside of us. So this leads me to making sure you do the work of knowing who you are, good and bad. There's an expression, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. Know it all about yourself. In psychology, we say that everybody has a shadow, right? And a shadow is basically the parts of yourself that you don't like to face, you know. And all of us have this, by the way. It's the part of us that we deem unworthy. And we just hide it, you know. Like, let's say you grew up with a certain message that a certain personality trait of yours is not good enough. It's not likable. It's not lovable. So you don't like it. Let's say, like, for example, someone I worked with said that they were always labeled as like somebody that talks too much when they were growing up. Every time they talk, they were told they talk too much. So her trigger is if somebody tells her to be quiet, or if somebody tells her like, oh my gosh, you're talking too much, or anything that makes her feel that she is overexpressive, right? She gets really triggered. Why? Because that's her shadow. So I said, so when we work to face that part, what does it mean to be somebody that talks too much? You know, and were you really talking too much in this instance, or was it just their perception, or was it, you know, so like breaking down these pieces and realizing, what is it that I'm working so hard to cover up or to try to like appear the opposite of, you know, and why is that so bad? We all have flaws. We all have things that we deem not so likable, right? But when you start to accept those aspects of yourself and say, even if it's something, let's say a weakness, even if it's something that's not perfect, right? Like, let's say you are somebody who talks too much, right? When you actually accept it and you say, you know what, I do talk too much sometimes. Let's say, you know what, I do interrupt people a lot. And that's not good and I need to stop. But you've come to terms with it. You've accepted it. I promise you, if someone mentions it, it won't trigger you. You know why? Because you've accepted it and you're working on it. You're going to go from, what? No, that's not me, to, you know what, you're right, I am working on that. You just become more centered. I don't know if you, anybody here ever watched Friends? Show Friends. It's like, there's this old scene that I always use in my work because it was really powerful. There's this scene, and by the way, Friends is not by any means, by me mentioning example, by any means a model or anything. I'm just using the specific scene, disclaimer, okay? But there's this scene that I remember watching, and it's the scene with Monica, Rachel, and Phoebe, right? And basically, Phoebe, she tells Monica, you're high maintenance. And Monica is high maintenance at times, right? She goes, what? I'm high maintenance? No, I'm not. Like, basically, why did you say that? She gets so defensive and she spends so much energy trying to prove that she's not, right? And then she goes, well, you know, Rachel, she's a pushover. And Rachel's like, I'm not a pushover. But then they show how Rachel is actually a pushover. So then they go and they're so heated. They're like, you know, so angry about like her calling them these things. And they come back and they're like, you know what, Phoebe, we figured out who you are. And they're like, you are flaky. And then she goes, I am flaky. And they're like, what? Like, what? That's it? You're okay with that? You accept? She's like, yeah, she knows that about herself. Which is literally my point, is that it doesn't mean that it's a good quality by her saying that. It just means that we're not living anymore with this idea that we always have to be perfect. And Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, he says this powerful quote, right? He says that if you know yourself, you will not be harmed by whatever is said about you. And this takes work, by the way. Like I say this as somebody who's constantly doing this work, and it's not easy, but it is rewarding. You know, when you notice, oh my gosh, why did I work so hard to over-explain myself in that moment? And you're like, oh, it's because I wasn't accepting something about myself. You know, when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was complimented, what did he say? He said, may Allah make me better than what they think of me, and forgive me for what they do not know about me. So he didn't put in a lot of energy in trying to correct their perception of him. He just wanted to be better than that. But he also understands that he has flaws, and he asked Allah to forgive him for what they do not know about him. There's so much acetylene when you start to just pay attention to how you view yourself and what you refuse to accept about yourself. And, you know, and by the way, and there might be instances where someone says something about you and it's not right at all, and you don't have to accept it. You can say, that doesn't apply to me. That's not actually true. You know, and it's okay for you but because it's more just about speaking the truth in those moments. It's not more about like, I need that person to view me that way, you know, because again, everybody's perception of you is going to be different. And if you spend so much time working on your correcting people's or monitoring other people's perception of you, you're always going to struggle, because even in your own family, with your own loved ones, every single person in your family has a different perception of you. And you think, like I said earlier, you think like, this is the image that I have of myself and that's how everyone views me. No. Everyone has their own perception of you, and it's reflective, and everyone's perception of you, whoever interacts with you in the world, it's going to be based on their own lens and their own heart and their own interpretations of their interactions with you as well, right? And so there's power in knowing yourself, And you know what's really powerful about that from a spiritual point of view and from a tazkiyah point of view is that the more you get to know yourself and the more you start accepting the aspects of yourself you don't like, and you start working on them after you accept them and you come to terms that I don't have to be perfect, I don't always, that you're working on yourself, you actually give less reason for your ego to come up. So why does the nafs and the ego come up? It comes up oftentimes to maintain an image that gives it security. So, and it comes up whenever we feel that security is shaken. So let's say you've already accepted the truth, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? And obviously not ugly in literal sense, but like the things that, that are good about you, the things that Allah has given you that are blessings, but the things that you have that are challenges that you have to work on, you come to terms with them, right? And you understand, yeah, I am working on this. Yeah, this is hard for me. This is a struggle. When it comes up, instead of going into, the ego likes to protect its image. And the nafs comes up every time you feel like you have an image to protect. So when you no longer are worried about the image and you're just worried about what is true, the ego has less reason to come up. Does that make sense? So that's why this work is so powerful. We think, oh, this is just like, she's talking about psychology, has nothing to do with my spirituality. No, it's very much connected. The work you do mentally and emotionally actually creates an easier environment for you to work on your nafs and for you to nourish this heart, and vice versa. The work you do spiritually helps you thrive mentally and emotionally. They support each other and they're connected. So your words matter, the words you speak to yourself, and the words you put out, and the words, especially the words that you say about yourself, they matter. In my book, I mentioned the study that was done on plants, and they took two plants, they gave it the same external conditions, the same sun, the same amount of light, same amount of water, but they spoke kindly to one and they spoke unkindly to the other, and one bloomed and grew and one did not. This is why the power of verbal abuse. It really does affect the way people bloom. And so it's, and the way you speak to yourself. Words matter. And we know this, right? Like, think about even ruqya, right? You read the most perfect words on water. Why? And then you're told to take a bath with that water, right? And drink that water. Why? Because words impact everything that they touch. Now imagine when you add the words of Allah. That's why dhikr is important. That's why your morning and evening adhkar are important. That's why reading Quran is important. But even the words you speak are important. What does it, in the Quran, a good word is like a tree. So like, and with branches that bears fruits. So your words, we often think the words we say to each other. No, it's also the words you say to yourself. And it's okay if you catch yourself, correct yourself, And you could say astaghfirullah. You know why you say astaghfirullah when you speak badly to yourself? Because wouldn't you say astaghfirullah when dealing with Allah's creation if you speak badly to them? Why? Because they're Allah's creation, you're supposed to treat them well? Well, you're His creation too. So when you speak badly to yourself, it's not minimal, by the way. It's actually, you're wronging yourself. So you should say astaghfirullah, and you should correct it. Because then you're now looking at yourself, I'm your creation too, and I should be kind to myself. Just as we practice the attributes of Allah with others, we should also practice them with ourselves. And so, I encourage you to really, from this talk, to assess what is a struggle that you have, and when it comes to your perception of Allah and your perception of yourself. And I'm sure in the Q&A we're going to open it up. We have a few minutes before Maghrib, where I'm sure some of these questions will come up in more detail. But just assess what is it that reflect on your own perception of Allah and your own perception of yourself, and pick a name of Allah that you're going to match that struggle with. You're not compassionate with yourself, it's time to access Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. You're not very loving with yourself, it's time to access Al-Wadud. You don't feel enough, it's time to access Al-Mughni, the one who suffices, right? So I'll pause here and I'll take questions before Maghrib, inshallah. Thank you.
You started by saying about how we always care about whether we're pleasing somebody else or not. The flip side of that, I feel like, is I don't care what people think of me, right?
Yeah.
Which is also kind of scary. So how do you navigate?
Yeah. So people usually find so balance is so important in our faith, right? And people usually find their balance by going through from one extreme to another. So oftentimes people, like, let's say people who are have anger management issues, in anger management, they usually go from being very aggressive to being very passive. So being very angry and expressive in an angry way to, I'm not angry, I don't care, they shut down, right? And then they find that there's a healthier approach, which is being assertive, which is that you can express that you're upset, but you don't have to express it that way, right? So I think it's noticing the extremes that we go to and trying to balance ourselves out. Because at the end of the day, anything on opposite extreme is not good. Being so people pleasing is not good. Being so not caring about people and being considerate is also not good.
What are some ways to self-reflect? I know journaling is one, but
Yeah.
what do you do? Do you just like ask yourself, who am I?
No, I think, no, that's a great question. I think that, I think self-reflection is an art, and I think that it's just you cultivating a heart that's looking for meaning. I really think that's what self-reflection is you going through life, and everything you go through, you're asking different questions internally. What is Allah giving me? What is Allah doing for me? You get stuck in traffic. What is Allah, giving me an opportunity to do? Maybe it's dhikr. Maybe it's, I go through an interaction, I feel a certain way. Why do I feel this way? It's literally you building the muscle of you turning inward rather than going outward. Because when you go outward enough, it turns into a very harmful cycle. This is where you end up basically blaming the external constantly for what you go through, right? And this is harmful, and this is why we have to protect ourselves from that, right? But I think it just cultivating that approach where you're looking for meaning. You're a meaning seeker, you're a truth seeker. You go through things and you understand you are always God's student, and He is always your teacher. When you approach life that way, even every day, and you say, I am your student and I'm always learning from you, and checking in with your heart, by the way, is so important. How is my heart? And you don't have to say it out loud, by the way. How is my heart today? No, just actually right now, right? You can check in with your heart and you don't have to say a word, right? But if you're not used to that, you can an exercise I do with my students is you put your hand on your heart and you start off by just saying Allah, 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 and you say it a few times until you feel that vibration. And what's really powerful about that is that, subhanAllah, it's not a coincidence, because we know in the Arabic language that every word has a different makhraj, right? There's makharij al-huruf, right? And that every word has its area of output, right? So ha comes from the throat, right? Lam comes from the tongue. Do you know the words in Allah, right? The heh comes from the lowest part of the throat. So that's not a coincidence. That when you say Allah, your heart vibrates. You feel that vibration. So to start off like that, because sometimes you're like, what do you mean connect with my heart? Yeah, you have a heart that actually was designed to long for Allah, to long for Him. And we have evidence of this from the Quran. Ibrahim alayhi salam, in a time of idolatry, everything around him didn't remind him of Allah. It was his heart that longed for Allah. And he would go and he would think the moon is his Lord. And then no, the sun is my Lord. Then he'd understand that it's not. Because it didn't suffice that longing. So when we start to, and this is what the H.O.M.E method is rooted in, is you understanding your design. That if Allah gave you a purpose, then He created your design to match that purpose. But many of us are disconnected from these tools within us. Your heart was literally designed to worship Allah and to long for Him and to love Him. And it's always there, longing for Him. When you address that longing and you live your life being connected to that longing, you start asking different questions. It doesn't mean that you don't get weighed down by life. It doesn't mean that you don't feel pain. It doesn't mean, but your heart, you understand this heart it looks above. So I go through this, but I'm looking above that. That's what self-reflection is. I see the mountain, I'm looking to Allah. I see the sunset, I'm thinking of Allah. Something happens to me, I'm thinking of Allah. That's what self-reflection is. You know, I feel something internally, I'm thinking of Allah. Yeah.
I would love to know your thoughts on like Inside Out. How does that relate to everything you're talking about?
I didn't watch.
102?
I watched one, but a long time ago. I would have to rewatch it again because I'm a bit critical sometimes of the messaging of certain things. I heard there was some issue with the second one though. Was no?
I don't
Okay,
know.
I guess I'll look into it. Yeah, inshallah. Yes.
Another question. Has our self-image and our image of Allah correlate? And how?
Okay, so what you feel and how you perceive yourself, you often project onto Allah, right? If you feel like you're unlovable, you're gonna have a hard time believing Allah doesn't love you. If you think that you're somebody who's easily rejected, you're gonna think Allah rejects you and rejects your dua. So we often project onto Allah what is unexplored within ourselves, right? If you think you're somebody who is not successful or somebody who is gonna always fail, you have this image of yourself, then you're gonna think that you'll never be successful in your faith with Allah, right? So everybody has certain areas where they have a flawed perception of themselves, and it does affect the way you. Let's say even you don't project it onto Allah. Let's just say you have a negative perception of yourself. You're always in a state of shame. Shame is so crippling. Shame is one of those, and I'm not talking about, by the way, healthy shame when it comes to Allah, like you doing a sin and you feeling shame in front of Allah. I'm not talking about that kind of shame, right? I'm talking about toxic shame. Toxic shame is, like I mentioned, it's different from guilt. Guilt is like you do something bad, you think, oh, that's bad, I want to fix it, right? Toxic shame is you inherently feel like you are bad and you're not good. And when you constantly have that perception of yourself, a lot of that shame comes up and shaitan uses that shame against you. You're not worthy of going to Allah. Who are you to go to Allah? He's not going to answer you. So, because we're not just dealing with ourselves. We have an enemy that Allah told us to.
Allahu Akbar.